Hi, this is Odeean. Today I've got the Daca Toys Scientific Explorer Kronos. This box that Kronos comes in is a pretty sturdy box. It's really huge. You can see that it hardly fits in my tent here. It's got a magnetic catch on the front. Now my Kronos is already removed, but it was in there nice and straight, not jumbled up like I've seen with some others. Flipping the whole thing around, more Kronos here, some kind of a render at the back. It's really attractive, actually. The box looks pretty awesome, and I think it's pretty fantastic. On closer inspection, I did find that it's kind of ripped here. You can see it's kind of separating there. I didn't notice it right away, but yeah, it is a bit ripped. Here is the figure itself. Now, I was very, very apprehensive about what I would get when I cracked this toy open, because I was a bit late to the game in getting mine. I bought it from Chumungmung, but I had pre-orders at BBTS and they still haven't shipped theirs, so I just sort of transferred over. But a lot of people who were getting the first batch of these were reporting pretty severe QC issues, and alas, mine does have some QC. I will get to those in due time, but just the figure itself, as it looks when it comes out of the box, looks pretty good. Pulling right back like this, you can see he's got a big burly form to him, and look, I've got problems with this, but to be honest, that does look pretty good. He cuts a nice figure, he's got a good stature. In my lighting here, my detailing seems to be, well, his detailing seems to be showing up reasonably well, and if all you ask out of a Kronos is a huge G1 looking, at least masterpiece scaled version of Skyfire, then this guy does fit that bill. Putting our new Skyfire next to Masterpiece Optimus Prime, you can see that he scales just about right. That looks to me to be how big Skyfire was supposed to be. Throwing in some more, a Sideswipe and a Huffer, you can see that they scale almost perfectly with Kronos as well. So he does fit the current need that we have for this big size Skyfire. If you prefer classics and you're going to use Orion as your Optimus Prime, then it starts to get a bit out of whack. So I definitely think this is primarily a Masterpiece Collection toy, and it's not really aimed at classics at all. So I'm still waiting for my classics version of Skyfire. The Hasbro version that's coming out now of Jetfire, that will kind of temporarily fill that void. But what I really want to see is the mecha form Sky Guardian as my classics targeted Skyfire. Looking at it up close like this, you may be able to see the start of what is wrong with this guy. So right in the middle of the chest there, you can see a whole series of little scratches. They were the first defect that I noticed, and to be honest, I didn't really care that much about those, because I'm probably going to whack a big Autobot symbol right there, so that's no big deal. Unfortunately, the next thing that I noticed was that his thumb isn't attached to the hand. If I can just focus in on that, you can see there's no pin, so it just falls off, and even if you wanted a pin, it's kind of deformed, so you wouldn't be able to do it. I'm going to glue this thumb on, but for the purposes of the rest of the review, I'm just going to put this thumb away because I don't want to lose it till I get some glue. Kronos here has some nice sounding ratchets. So that's pretty good. The elbows aren't ratcheted, but it's a kind of double joint, and if you get it just right, you can bend pretty significantly up like that. That's a decent double joint. This one seems to work. It's got a swivel there. This one seems to work, but alas, the other one can't hold its weight, and that really comes into play when you tab the gun in. There's this slot that goes right through the hand. I know that bothers some people, the fact that it goes right through. For me, I don't care that much, but the gun kind of pegs on there, and you can close his fingers around it. Now, if you want him to hold his gun up like this, no chance. It is not going to happen. My one is just too loose. I've thought about tightening those screws, but to be honest, the plastic on this seems pretty bad, and I think that if I'm going to tighten these screws to get more friction, it's not really going to tighten. I get the feeling that it's really just going to strip, so I'm not going to do that. If anything, I might just shove some blue tack up there into the elbow joint if I need to hold that arm out, or alternately maybe I can make him left-handed. The gun does look very good for a Skyfire gun. It looks a lot like the cartoon, which is exactly what I want. I want it to look like the cartoon. Pretty happy with it. It is hollow at the bottom like this, but I can forgive that. That's not too much of a problem. But this is not molded in this color. I think it is molded in white and painted gray. It's not really showing up on the camera here because it's so dark compared to the white back there. But on the inside, I can see some thinness of the sprayed color, and I think that it's white showing through. Also, I've chipped it in a little spot there. That looks white. And I've got a little chip in the paint on the end here. If I can focus on that, you can see the white showing through. So this is just a white piece of plastic. The next kind of issue that I've got, which is a big worry for me, is that this little tab thing always comes loose when I'm moving the arm, as it did by itself when I was showing this earlier. Now the fact that it comes loose isn't what's worrying me. What's worrying me is that it has this minuscule little clip to kind of hold it together, and this is very, very tiny little piece of plastic, so small in fact that I could just accidentally break it off with my finger, and that's really what is locking the arm in. So this lock that stops the arm from coming out is that tiny piece of plastic. So even if I was to just inadvertently yank on this somehow, I'm pretty sure I could shear that little piece of plastic right off, and that is a basically pathetic excuse for a locking mechanism. To make it worse, in the areas surrounding that, it seems that there's kind of cracks starting to form in the plastic. You can see a kind of crack starting to form there. It seems like this plastic hasn't really been injected into all the parts very well. If I run over the whole toy, you can see lots of areas where the plastic just, like up here, this is kind of, I don't know what you would describe that is. It's like the part where the mold had two halves and there was a top half and a bottom half. Plastic has seeped out through the gap and made this ugly blemish here. And I mean, you get that in a few places, like little warpages, like on the front of the thigh area here. It's like uneven. One of them's shot off at a weird angle. You get that on the other side as well. It's like the corners down here, they're not made. It's like, I don't know if that, maybe it was 3D modeled in a rough way, or maybe the plastic deformed as being pulled out of the mold, or the mold just didn't inject right. I don't know what it is, but there's just these little ugly bits all over the place. It's like unfinished. It's like this is a prototype and not the final thing. Like, look at this edge here. It's not a straight line. I haven't really, like, back here on this section, you can see more ugly little lines. I haven't really owned a toy at this stage of kind of unfinishedness before, and it's like the thing is so big that you don't notice it, to be honest. At the arm's distance where you're going to look at it like this, those defects don't make themselves evident, but when you hold it in your hand right up close, like when you're transforming it or playing with it, it starts to look really cheap. And I know that stuff might sound a little bit harsh about the plastic, but I only say that in comparison to a lot of other toys that I've bought that seem to be more polished than what this guy is. They have a better fit and finish on the tolerances of the plastic that's actually been pumped out of that mold, whereas this guy doesn't. Now, those things are not deal breakers for me, and at the price I paid, I'm still satisfied with the robot mode, and it still does what I want it to do, which is look good on the shelf, and I probably won't be playing with it. So stuff like this that I was complaining about, I probably won't be breaking, but it's just, you know, there are far worse problems yet to come with this toy, which kind of, you know, they're pissing me off, to be honest. For posability in the hip area, we can move these skirts up out of the way, and we have just a friction pivot out here, which can't hold the weight at all, but that's holding the weight really, it's not necessary, so that's fine. We've got a ratcheted backwards and forwards joint here, which the ratchet sounds good, but I can just see expansion happening in this crack as I do it, which in the long run is a bit of a worry, but right at the moment hasn't caused any problem. We've got a swivel up here. We've got this ratchet at the knee. Now, I can't seem to get it to bend any more than that. I've seen pictures online of it going further, but my one doesn't go any further than that. Down on the foot, let's move these little shields out of the way. We've got a bit of ankle tilt here, which seems to work okay with me. Now, if you've watched Optibotomus's video review, you will have seen he snapped his foot off, but for some reason, my foot seems to work just fine. Now, I think one of the reasons that it is working fine like that is that this has been filled with tons of lube in there. There's like oil dripping off that thing, and as I touch it, I can even feel oil on my fingers here. So I get the feeling that they kind of, on this later batch that came out, they might have learned a bit from what was breaking earlier on and just lubed these guys up before they left the factory. There's a little bit of waist swivel, just a tiny little bit, but the backpack basically stops it. So unless you want him to be a weird Skyfire with no red backpack, he has essentially no waist articulation. All of that adds up to a somewhat dynamic figure that is still pretty unstable. Partially because of the lack of friction in this outward hip joint, it kind of tends to do that. So, I mean, in theory, you could do certain poses if you put some sticky pads under his feet or something like that. But in practice on your shelf, you're going to want him to be relatively vertical. Now, for the transformation. So the first thing we've got to do, pop open his fists, the forearms rather, try to get the fists into a shape that will fit into them, close them back up. Let's do the same on the other side. It can be a bit tricky because he's got so many knuckle joints. There we go. Next is the place where you discover that he is a parts former, and you just split him in half and put this huge chunk aside because it's not involved in the transformation. Then we want to carefully bend open these panels and detach this part, which is really getting into the realms of parts forming now. And this thin joining section is so weak. Never pry it like that. Always do both sides little bit by little bit, because if you're going to peel it back like that, this thing is not going to survive. Next, undo this little flap that I was complaining about before, the scary little flap, and then we're going to move these arms down to the sides like this. Then carefully grab both sides of the hips and start to move them out. Now, here's where I hit my first bad problem. So my hip on this side goes out that far, and that's all. Watch what happens on this side. Oh, now I know this is a parts former, but come on, freaking the whole leg coming off. I know it's not intentional, but there's a part missing from mine, which means that the whole leg just comes off. So put the leg aside. So just to recap, this is what I've got left of Kronos during transformation so far. That's awesome. Next, grab these chest panels, and we're just going to get them kind of a bit out of the way. Doesn't really matter where they go at this stage. Just get them off. Now something's become jammed in here. There we go. And maybe I'm going to bend these down in case they snap off. Don't want that to happen. I'm going to bend this cockpit section up and the head back at the same time. That's going to kind of go the whole way. Then I can slide out this internal nose section for the front of the plane, which is god ugly. I'll get to that in the end. Okay, now here is where probably the worst defect in the whole thing for me comes into play. So what is supposed to happen now is that this shoulder bends around like this, and there's a kind of cavity for it to snap into. It should snap in like that, and that's how it sits. Then we bend this around, and it kind of pegs into the side of the shoulder, pegs into the top of this die-cast plate, and becomes nice and solid. Now, watch what happens when I do the other side. So I'm bending it around, bending it around, what? It doesn't go any more than that. It doesn't go into the hole. It doesn't fit in that hole. There's nothing I can do. If I push it harder, it's going to snap and the whole thing is going to be destroyed. Basically, this white plastic here doesn't fit into the hole that it's meant to move through. So I'm going to stop the video now. I'm going to go and get a razor or maybe a file or a pair of scissors, and I'm going to cut a piece of plastic off the toy. So as you can see now, I've cut enough plastic off that joint so that it will fit in the cavity for it without breaking. A bit tricky, and I didn't hurt myself, thank goodness. I also see now that this thing joining the waist swivel on is also crooked, but I'm going to leave that for another day. Okay, now condensing these legs down. I think I'm going to do the leg that's not on first. I've grabbed both sides really hard and I'm trying not to let it go out of control. Pushing it in. Try again. Try again. Maybe that's enough. According to the picture on the back, that's not enough, so I'm going to try a bit harder. It won't do it, so I was going to see how that goes and see if it meets up in vehicle mode. Look, I don't think it's going to go any deeper than that. Let's get this foot done. The foot says to bend this toe right in like that, and this like this, and that goes like that. I think that's how it's supposed to look. Okay, the other side. So this time I'm going to start with the foot just to get it out of the way. Now this foot doesn't want to bend. Okay, it's done. Now, the hard bit. God damn it, this thing's gonna... Now that one went all the way. Why doesn't the other one go all the way? I put it off camera and just pushed it as hard as I could, and it sort of went all the way in, like the picture shows and like the other side did. But man, it made a big noise going in like that. I got a really bad feeling that it's never coming out again, or maybe never going to work again, but you'll know by the end of the video if that was true or not. It's a bit hard to tell from the instructions if this is supposed to go back on this way or the other way. So at the moment I'm going to put it on this way. Look, I just can't tell. The picture's not really clear enough. I think what's meant to happen now is that the wings fold out like this. Close these up. Open up the tail. Now these little bits are for the nose, so I'm going to pull those out. There's tabs in here which, hang on, which you need something strong to pry open with. My fingers just weren't cutting it. These are made of plastic, by the way, at least on mine. Now hopefully this is going to just slide on in. Okay, and at the back, they're going to peg in right about there, if I can do it. That's one. Ah, it's gone in again. Come out. God damn that freaking thing. There, pegged in. Seems a bit weird. Moving up to the nose, we get these little intakes that I pulled out of the backpack and pegged them on. They only go in one particular way, so there's no confusing each side. If you look at it right from the edge here, it doesn't look right. It's sort of tilted down with a big gap at the back, but I'm pretty sure that's how it's meant to go because it didn't fit on the other side. Now, that's it. This is Skyfire. He is staying together, I'll give him that. Even though my leg is disconnected, the big peg or tab in the side of the backpack is kind of holding it all in one piece. even though it should be falling apart, missing the pin as mine is. Now, if this was 10 years ago and you showed me this, I would think that is pretty awesome. But you know what? It's not 10 years ago. It's today, and this is pretty shit. If you're looking at this and thinking, wow, that's an awesome representation of G1 cartoon Skyfire, I think your standards are a lot lower than mine. So just look at this. Look at this. That is just not right. Look at these huge holes. Look at these bits hanging off it here. Look at the back. Look at this panel at the back. It's not clear plastic. There's clear plastic on the front. This is just roughly masked off and sprayed over. And look, if I bring it up close like this, you can just see the paint edge. It's like what you would get if you did your own custom and got some masking tape and did the best you could to make it look nice, but in the end it was kind of 95% there, but not like a real toy would look. That's what this is like. It looks like a glorified custom that is a really good custom, but not a really good toy. Look at the nose of this jet. That does not look like Skyfire. It's got hints of Skyfire, the angles, the colors, the overall shape, yeah, Skyfire. But just take a look at a screen grab from the cartoon and look at this. Is that Skyfire? It is not Skyfire. Look at this ugly, ugly squared off edge here to let the nose go in for transformation. Why is that necessary? Why was it necessary for this to go in? I mean, his waist rotation is non-existent because of the backpack. So this whole feature was built into it just so he could have a non-existent rotation. It does not make sense. Look at the intakes on the back. These do not look good. These are like the lids of markers or a toothpaste tube lid. It is not modeled well. Like, it's made to whatever standard the factory made it, but that's not what I'm getting at. The design is poor. The 3D model of this was half-assed. That does not look, it just doesn't look professional. It's not even symmetrical. The little bits, the little lines, if you look the whole way around, are deformed in some places and straight in others. It's like whoever did this was not proficient in the tools that he was using to make it. The details on the surface in some instances are good, in some instances are like an afterthought, like the toy was finished and just looked too big and plain, and so a shape was dumped here, or a line was etched out here, or some fins chucked on the side there. It doesn't not, these details do not hide the fact that there's this big ugly square shape here, and they do not hide the fact that there's this huge gap, and they don't hide the fact that this whole panel, look at it from this angle. The angle is wrong. If you get the cartoon and look at it, it doesn't look like that at all. This whole piece is oriented incorrectly, and it doesn't fit what it's supposed to be. I mean, if you have a vague memory of Skyfire, that is kind of fitting a vague memory. But if you actually look at the cartoon, this thing is so far off on 100 different levels that it's a disappointment in jet mode. And does all of that sound extreme? Yeah, it probably does. I am ranting a little bit, but this was sold as a masterpiece toy. Now, we all know exactly what masterpiece toy means. It's not a scale reference. Masterpiece is a reference to the quality and the finish and the intelligence of the design. This parts forming custom is not fitting the masterpiece name. The thread over on TFW is masterpiece Skyfire. Well, this is not a masterpiece Skyfire. If this was not pushed as a masterpiece, if it was just sold as Kronos, take it as it is, I think that it would have been much better off for everybody. I mean, we've been built up and up and up, and this is not a terrible figure. I mean, even though it's falling apart, his legs popping off, it doesn't transform properly. Honestly, for a big toy like this, that price, $165, is not, it's not in the realms of stupidity. It's just that when you thought you were getting a masterpiece and you really got this, that's where the disappointment creeps in. My final thoughts. Okay, a lot of bad things in this video, but is the prognosis as bad as all that stuff combined? Well, you know what? I like this on my shelf in robot mode. For a single mode figure, maybe 165 is a bit too high. I can never transform this again. I never will. Those legs feel like the plastic is going to shear off. I had to pull them so hard to get it out. If I'm going to ever transform this again, it will break, and that will be a write-off of the whole cost. So at least if I leave it in robot mode, I've got it a robot of Skyfire. So as an action master, which is what it is now, I think 165 was a bit high. I mean, I've bought a lot of other big toys that have a single robot mode that are like vinyls and stuff, and I think 120, 130 would have been fair for this action master, but you know, it's not insanely expensive for what it is. Let's just put it that way. And until a better version of Skyfire comes along, this is the only big Skyfire that we've got. As I've said, I'm going to be definitely buying that mecha form Sky Guardian Skyfire when that comes out for my classics, but he's nowhere near the height of this, so he's not really competing for the dollar when it comes to that. I've got 2 Hasbro versions on order, so again, Hasbro version doesn't really look like Skyfire, and it's not competing. So who's competing with these? Nobody. I mean, there's supposed to be the, what is it, Fans Toys one, but you know, I have my doubts whether Fans Toys will ever release their Skyfire. I've got a feeling that the whole market will burn out before we get to that stage. I mean, I'm hoping for it, and if it does come, I bet you it's better than this, but that could be years away. So I do think it is worth picking up Kronos to have in his robot mode. I bought it. I'm not returning it, despite the problems that it has. He does look cool on the shelf with my Masterpiece Transformers. In robot mode, he does look cool. So he's got that going for him. This is not a total disaster. It's just not a Transformer, and it's just not really Masterpiece because of that. So I guess the message is, know what you're paying for. Don't plan on doing that much with it. Know that this is what you're getting, and hopefully it'll be fit for the purpose of displaying in robot mode. If you go into it like that, you're probably going to enjoy it. And if you think you can afford 165 with shipping, you know, it's 200. That's what it cost me. If you think that you can afford 200 for the Skyfire robot, then go for it. It's probably worth it if you know that that's what you want. Anyway, this has been my video review for Daca Toys Kronos, supposedly Masterpiece Skyfire. I'm Odeean. Thank you for watching.